Last time, we discussed absorption of lipids as well as its transport in the body. So when you ingest lipids in the body, it will eventually be packaged as chylomicrons in the intestinal epithelial cells, which will be transported into the lymph and then into the blood. Now, in the capillary walls, there are lipoprotein lipases, which recognizes apoprotein C2. Now, the lipoprotein lipases help in the degradation of the chylomicron triglycerides into fatty acids and glycerol. Now, the fatty acids that are the product of degradation can be utilized into energy in the different tissues, especially in skeletal muscle cells. And your fatty acids are converted eventually into carbon dioxide and water with the subsequent release of ATP. Now, the fatty acids can also be stored in your adipose tissues in the form of your triglycerides. Now, the glycerol moiety, as what we have mentioned from our previous lecture, it is transported back into the liver, wherein it can be utilized for gluconeogenesis, or it can also be utilized to synthesize new triacylglycerides. Now, in the next section of our discussion, we will be discussing beta oxidation of fatty acids. So we will focus here in this portion of the diagram. So today we're going to discuss the beta oxidation of fatty acids. Now, this is your adipose tissue. Now, within the adipose tissues are triglycerides. Now, triglycerides are broken down by your lipases into free fatty acids. Now, the triglycerides are broken down into your free fatty acids in response to low insulin to glucagon ratio. Now, kailan ba nangyayari na mababa ang insulin and mataas yung glucagon? Now, this happens during number 1, fasting. Okay. Number 2, in between meals. Number 3, it also happens during exercise. Now, bakit kailangan na mababa yung insulin during exercise? Or bakit siya bumababa during exercise? Now, the amount of insulin decreases during exercise because the amount of glucose that is taken up by the cells also increases. Hence, since the uptake is directly proportional to the amount of insulin, the increase in the uptake of glucose also increases the amount of insulin that binds to its receptor so that your glucose can go directly into the cell. Now, this is important because if insulin is increased during exercise, plasma glucose will go into the cells and this will lead to hypoglycemia. Now, if the amount of insulin also increases during exercise, adipose tissue will not be able to release the free fatty acids that are stored as triacylglycerols to be used as fuels into the cells. Furthermore, the amount of insulin or the decrease in insulin favors the metabolism of glucose into the liver, hence favoring gluconeogenesis, which restores the amount of glucose into the blood. Now, let's take a look at the following diagram. So we have here, let's go back. We have here your triglycerides, which are released as free fatty acids by your lipases. Now, the most common free fatty acids include your palmitic acid, your oleic acid, and your stearic acid. Now, the amount or the fatty acids that are found in your triglycerides varies depending on the diet. Now, you have to remember that your fatty acids are lipophilic. Hence, they cannot just be released into the blood without being associated with your protein. Now, the protein in the blood that associates your fatty acids is your albumin. Now, the albumin has a lipophilic core wherein your fatty acids are associated. So this is the core, the lipophilic core, which contains your free fatty acids, and this one is your albumin. Now, once your albumin travels into the blood, together with it is your fatty acids, it will reach your tissues. Now, the tissues, of course, each cell contains the plasma membrane. And your free fatty acids can be transported into the cell in two ways. So, number one is through diffusion. And number two is through the help of your fatty acid transporter, or fatty acid binding protein. Now, once inside the cell, more of the fatty acid binding protein associates with your free fatty acids. Hence, at any point in time, there is a very low amount of free fatty acid in the cytosol. This is very important because you have to remember that your fatty acids are lipophilic. Hence, they can disrupt the hydrophobic interactions present in your proteins. Now, once in the cytosol, okay, it will travel into the mitochondria. Okay, so within the cell, you have your mitochondria. So this is your mitochondria. And it is composed of the outer mitochondrial membrane. Outer mitochondrial membrane. Now, there are two important protein complexes that are present in the outer mitochondrial membrane. So, one of which is your fatty acyl-CoA synthase. Fatty acyl-CoA synthetase, rather. Okay. Now, this enzyme complex is very important because your fatty acids should be activated by converting them into your fatty acyl-CoA derivative before they can be metabolized. So that's a prerequisite. So your fatty acid are converted into your fatty acyl-CoA with the help of your ATP and CoA. Now, in turn, your ATP is converted into AMP plus pyrophosphate. Now, this pyrophosphate is degraded or is hydrolyzed into two inorganic phosphates, and the hydrolysis of this inorganic pyrophosphate into two inorganic phosphates drives or helps in driving the forward reaction. Now, another important protein present in the outer mitochondrial membrane is your CPT1. So, that's your carnitine, palmitoyl, transferase. Now, anong ginagawa nitong CPT1, yung carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1? Now, the fatty acyl-CoA that you transport in the intermembrane space is converted into the fatty acyl carnitine. Your CPT1 transfers the fatty acyl moiety from the fatty acyl-CoA into carnitine. releasing fatty acyl carnitine and CoA in the process. Now, your fatty acyl carnitine is then transported into the into the matrix, and it will pass through the inner mitochondrial membrane. So this one is your intermembrane space. And then this is your inner mitochondrial membrane. And this area over here is your matrix. Now, inside or in the inner mitochondrial membrane, you have again two important protein complexes. So one of which is your carnitine acyl translocase. Carnitine acyl translocase. So dito natin nakikita yung importance nung carnitine kasi parang siya yung nagsaserve as a transport mechanism para maipunta mo yung fatty acid into the matrix kung saan talaga nangyayari yung beta oxidation. So important yon kasi wala ka naman direct na transporter ng fatty acid papunta talaga ng matrix. Now, you have to convert them into fatty acyl carnitine para ma-recognize siya ng specific transporter. Yun nga yung carnitine acyl translocase. So, your carnitine acyl translocase transports your fatty acyl carnitine into the matrix. And then, another important protein that can be found in the inner mitochondrial membrane is your CPT2. So, kanina, that's your CPT1, yung carnitine palmitol transferase 1. So, ngayon, yung CPT2 naman. Now, anong ginagawa ng CPT2? Now, your fatty acyl carnitine, of course, hindi naman ito talaga yung nagiging acetyl-CoA. You have to convert it back into fatty acyl-CoA. Fatty acyl-CoA. Now, in this process, kailangan mo ng coenzyme A para ma-transfer mo yung fatty acyl moiety from the carnitine. So, parang in effect, parang nag-exchange. So, tina-transfer mo yung fatty acid na moiety back to the coenzyme A and then producing your fatty acyl-CoA in the process and then carnitine. Now, itong carnitine na to na nasa matrix, 'di ba kanina nabanggit natin yung CAT. So, siya ngayon yung carnitine acyl translocase, siya ngayon yung maglalabas ng carnitine back into the intermembrane space. And then, yung fatty acyl-CoA kanina na na-produce natin will be used for beta oxidation. So, that's how your transport of fatty acid happens.